So welcome to Break the Mould with Anwyn. I'm here today with Michelle Powell, and I'd like to let her explain herself today. We are fellow NLP and master practitioners and hypnotherapists that have studied with Evolve and Relaunch. So over to you, Michelle.
Thanks, Anwyn. So yes, exactly what you said. I come from, a very long background in the wellness industry, I like to call it, with over 20 years now, which means I'm getting older. But I specialize in trauma and mental health recovery. And the way I see it is really just taking people through the worst shit that they can go through in life, where they feel like they've really lost themselves, and overcome what's happened to them, building all of their resources in the recovery phase, and then letting go of the stuff holding them back so that they can set up for a future that they actually want to have.
Beautiful.
I'm super curious, what made you want to reach out to me and have me on?
Just because of the connection with, the whole, like your PDSD and the trauma and all of that specialty.
Yeah.
My journey and the reason why I went into relationships because of abuse in my childhood. And so then I went through like a forgiveness process.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really powerful for me. And so, that's what I'd like to share about, like that's where I'm coming from. Yeah. And so, like I feel like trauma is a dirty word.
Mm-hmm.
And, there's this whole trauma informed, culture of, you have to be really careful. And I understand that. It's kind of like everybody is different, obviously. How do you approach it then? Like if it is such a taboo subject.
So I actually don't think it's a taboo subject.
Okay.
I actually think it's become almost a bit of a buzzword.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Almost lost a little bit of the depth of what it truly means when someone's going through, traumas and challenges and things that are really difficult. And I think some of the difficulties that you're describing, to me at least, is more of almost a walking on eggshells. Oh, we don't want to trigger anyone.
Exactly. Yeah.
To me, that's a load of crap. I honestly, and I say that with so much love and compassion for anyone going through anything, because if we're so afraid and we're walking on eggshells, then we're not going to be authentic. But there's a connotation that triggers are bad. Triggers are not bad. They shine a light in the darkness so that you can see exactly where to go to heal. So it's actually a good thing when someone gets triggered.
Although there are people that are not interested in personal development and who want to just push down their emotions. And I've had an experience of this recently.
Yeah.
And it's gone on because they were really triggered by something that I said. Basically around sex. And so it was just my expression, but they obviously were triggered by it because of their past experiences. And so, yeah, I was kind of, blamed for their emotions. And I have to take responsibility for that too, because I've expressed something and that has triggered somebody. But then also there's, a part of me that says, well, I'm not fully responsible. There is you have some responsibility. I don't control your life. Yeah, I am just, and you know me too. This person has known me for many years, and this is the way I am. I talk about sex openly and, all that sort of stuff. Yeah. So,
And so this is the thing. I don't think you can be responsible for how anybody else perceives you. Because, you know, back to NLP, delete, distort, generalize, all of that
yes.
stuff, right? So you can have good intention. You can have no malice in your heart at all. And some people are just going to take what you say wrong.
Yeah.
And that's not up to you to take responsibility for. If you're being authentic and, hand on your heart that you haven't gone out to hurt someone, then it is up to them to take that level of responsibility, because I don't believe it's anyone's job to tiptoe around people to make sure that they're not triggered. There's an old saying that goes, if you don't heal what's harmed you, you'll bleed on the people that didn't cut you.
I love that.
And while that's graphic,
yeah,
it's so true. You're not the
perfect.
person that hurt or harmed this friend, but maybe the fact that you triggered them, it could have been, or potentially still could be, I don't know, a really great conversation to go, what happened for you? Like, maybe you're the safe person that they can actually start to let go of and unravel some of that shit that they've gone through.
Yeah, yeah. And so how did this journey start for you?
Oh, cool. So it started when I was 18 years old.
Okay.
And I started out as a personal trainer and a fitness instructor. And, I was battling my own demons back then too. I had severe eating disorders, which was, a coping mechanism, if you will, for my household in which I grew up in, and so all of the eating disorders began when I was about 13 years of age. And so I actually started in the wellness industry when I was so young, because nobody knew how to help me, how to support me. And I ended up supporting them and comforting them on what was happening with me, because it was so shocking and confronting to them. And so that led me to go, right, well, I've got to do it myself. I need to find the knowledge and the wisdom and the education to overcome it for myself, and then maybe even help. Even if back then I just thought, if I could help one person not go through what I have, it'll be worth it.
Yeah.
And then that evolved over time. So that led very quickly into, in a couple of years' time, I was in management roles in gyms and wellness centers that led me all over the country. And over time, that evolved into holistic healthcare with the CHEK Institute. And then that led into more mental, emotional, and spiritual work, which then led into more and more and more personal development and professional development. And then when we met, like, into NLP and hypnotherapy, and that whole motto of never stop learning. And so I think that myself as a person has evolved as much as my business has over the last couple of decades.
Absolutely. Yeah. What's the CHEK Institute?
So the CHEK Institute was founded by Paul Chek, which is a global holistic institute which looks at well-being very holistically, so physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, and goes really, really deep and complex. So I studied with the CHEK Institute for about 8 years, which is where a lot of my holistic health practitioner background came from. And I found it to be exceptionally powerful, not just professionally, but personally. And I think it was a very wise maneuver for my part, because I love learning. But the Czech Institute, especially Paul himself, he's very big on the core value of you've got to walk the walk, not just talk the talk. And I've always loved that, because it grates me, because there's so many people that can say the things, but there are not that many people that actually live and breathe it. So it always aligns with me, you know, personally and professionally. And so even when I was studying with that, it was very much you've got to live and breathe it, otherwise it's never going to be true.
Yes.
And so we had to use ourselves a lot as our own guinea pigs. And yeah, it definitely helped shape who I am as a person and as a professional, even to this day.
Yeah. Yes, it's so true. Like, we do need to look in our own backyard before we start working on others, because we will come out in the form of our therapy or the way we interact with people, always, because that's our perception. Our perception is through our eyes.
Exactly. And I also feel like there's that deep understanding that it's not done. You can heal and
Yes.
move past certain things in life, and then that might be done. But your journey of self-discovery, of personal and professional development, whatever that looks like for you, that's never done.
No.
I liken it to a spiral staircase of evolution. Like, you keep leveling up all the time, and the journey's not over. It's like a game. You level up all the time.
Yeah. Like an infinity.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Yes. And I remember when we were doing NLP that you were so excited to go through all the negative emotions. You're going, yes, I want to get through this one. And and then, you know, like, they may come up again, you know, like later on down the track, like it could be something else that's associated with that. So yes, it's true. We have to keep continually always working on ourselves.
Yeah, exactly. And it's kind of like when you brush your teeth, you don't just do it once and then, oh well, that's done. You've got to
Yeah.
keep doing it. And like you said,
Maintenance.
yeah, you can do something once and you're like, okay, I've gotten a lot of it. But I reckon, at least this is what I've experienced over the years, and I wonder if you've been the same, that when you clear something and heal something, like, it starts off quite general, and then over time it gets really, really specific.
Yes, absolutely. I agree with that. Yeah. Yeah, you hone it in finer and finer every time. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
And so what I'd like to ask you about the importance of self-love with healing traumas.
Yeah. I think when it comes to going through any type of trauma in life, self-love doesn't really seem to come into the equation very often, at least from my clinical experience, because then they're not so focused on what's happening there. They're so focused on whatever the thing, the person, the situation, and how it's impacting them. So
So is
I
that
think,
an external view kind of thing?
yeah, I think so. I think it's more that everyone wants to resolve the thing that's stressing them or causing them difficulties, right? And we focus so much on that.
Mm.
And we can forget that if we've got to look after ourselves during all of that as well. It's not just fixing the external world, you know, whether it's a job or a relationship or whatever it is that's causing the concern. but it's also, how do you feel about yourself? How do you feel about life? I think the way I like to visualize it is a bit like a puzzle. And it's like all of the pieces need to be looked at and addressed to look at the totality of who someone is in their life, which also includes self-love. Because if that's not in the puzzle, then you can't see the whole picture.
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
I'm full of quotes and visualizations. That's how my brain works.
I love analogies. And so how does self-love look like to you? How do you practice it?
Yeah, that's a really cool question. You know, it can be little things like the way that you take little breaks or spend time in the sun or factor in whatever is important for you. So some of the ways that I personally practice self-love, I look at it in different categories. So like physically, I love going to the gym and I love going hiking and being out in nature. And so I'll factor those things into my week.
Yeah.
You know, mentally and emotionally, I spend a lot of time teaching events and coaching groups and private sessions as well. So I'm mentally engaged a lot. And so needing to have some chill time or some creative time or just time to relax with my partner is super important for my mental side of things. Emotionally, I always think it's important to have your go-to people. And not just emotionally, but in all categories, you know, like it could be, I call it your dream team. We've got the people that keep you at your best.
Yes.
And so those that you can talk to, those that you can have, you know, sessions with, whether it's chiropractor, acupuncture, you know, NLP, hypnotherapy, like making sure that there's those touch points that are just for you, so that you're not always giving, that you get to receive as well. Because self-love is not just about giving, it's also about receiving. And I think sometimes we forget that because we're so focused on giving, we forget to receive. And then there's the spiritual aspects of it, which to me are just honoring who you authentically are. So for me, spending time with the horses, doing cacao ceremonies, maybe I'll pull some angel cards, you know, just factoring in the things that make me feel truly happy. To me, that's self-care and that's self-love.
Yeah, beautiful. Are there any tools or strategies that you can talk about that help with the process of trauma or stressful events that have happened in your life?
There are so many, but I actually think that when you go through something traumatic, I think one of the first things that people get to do is be okay with not being okay, and to acknowledge that it was hard, that it was traumatic. Because oftentimes there's a connotation of, you know, being weak or, you know, that.
Or get over it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Move on, you know, push
Yeah.
it away and not think about it.
Yes. Or there's this comparison mentality. So and so has it so much worse, so therefore I have to shut this down.
Or someone else got over it quicker.
Yes.
Yeah.
And there's no right and wrong. It's just right and wrong for each individual. And I always say, if it feels hard, heavy, and tumultuous, then it is. And you don't have to justify that to anybody else. So I actually think that's a big step, is to have that acknowledgement that, you know what, it's hard.
Yeah.
Something feels hard, and we are designed by our very human nature to need one another. We're not designed to go through life on our own. And so finding those safe people and safe places where you can get support. I think that's fundamental. So I actually think that's one of the first things that has to happen. But
And
then
it's sometimes I think some people just need to be able to tell their story. You know, that can be the first step. Like somebody hasn't been listened to. Yeah.
yes, and I see that so frequently. And once again, there's negative connotations about letting the victim have a voice, because then you're living in victimville.
Oh, yeah.
There's a big difference from letting the victim have a voice and getting that energy out so you can let it go and start healing what's happened to you, to setting up camp permanently at pity party. Those are two very separate things, right?
Yeah.
Like, we've all come across people that live in
Wallow in it.
Yes. And that becomes almost their excuse why they can't do anything to help themselves moving forward. And what happens is, because we've all come across someone who lives in victimhood permanently, there's a fear of letting the victim have a voice because you don't want to end up like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But those are two very different things.
So
exactly what you said, being listened to, that's so powerful, to let that story out, to be heard, to be seen, to be held through that and go, that must have been really hard for you.
Yeah.
And it's almost, oh, okay, that part's done.
Yeah.
And then it's building all of the coping strategies, the knowledge, the wisdom, the understanding of what's happened to them in their mind, in their body, in their nervous system. And it's not just to help them overcome whatever they've experienced, but to me, it's also setting up what I call the toolkit for the rest of your life. Those go-to educational points that are just practical, that you can use and return to time and time again as life does its life thing. Because we all face challenges at some point. And so having those things in the toolbox, going, all right, I know what's happening in my nervous system. I know what's happening in my emotions. I know what's happening X, Y, Z. Then it can give you the awareness of what to do, but it also gives you compassion for your body, for being a human being, because we put so much pressure and expectation on ourselves just to get over things that you wouldn't expect anybody else to get over in a hurry.
Yeah, so true. I was diagnosed with ADHD as a child, and I think that may have had something to do with my childhood trauma. But interestingly enough, I was told by a psychiatrist that you get over it when you're a teenager, like you grow out of it. That's the expression they use, grow out of it. And so that was kind of empowering hypnotism for me, because I just believed that I grew out of it. And I've recently, heard of a lot of people being diagnosed as adults. And because this is the theory that this doctor said, that you don't have it as an adult. And so, you've grown out of it. And so, yeah, like, to me, like, I could have hung on to that and used it as an excuse, like you were saying before, and be the victim. Oh, well, this happened to me, so now I am this, and identify with that and just keep identifying with it. Or I could say, well, that was something that happened to me, and yes, this may be why it was, but I don't need to continue with that story if I don't find it empowering.
Yes. And I love that too, because I think we can use our stories as fuel or as excuses. And I love that you used it as fuel.
Yeah.
And you might be curious to hear that there are other therapists and specialists that agree that ADHD is not actually a diagnosis. Gabor Mate actually says it's a trauma response. So
Right. Yes.
you might be interested to look into some of that as well, because he actually he says very openly on podcast interviews, and he's got some phenomenal books because he specialises in trauma, and he said ADHD is a very common trauma response to something that was happening in the household that you were growing up in. So
Yes.
yeah, it makes a lot of sense with what you're sharing too.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. So then, if that's the case, then I mean, I suppose what it does for people is when they are diagnosed with it, it's like these are like aha moments. Oh, okay, that explains things. But then where do you go from that? Like, you can just stick with that identity, but what can you do about that?
Yeah, and I think it depends on what it is as to whether a diagnosis is empowering or disempowering. And those identity pieces, as you know, that can be concerning as well, because if you identify that's with something that's not you, like you're not ADHD, that's not who you are, it's something you experienced in your lifetime. But I think sometimes they're dealing with things from a symptoms basis rather than a cause basis.
Yes. Interesting.
Yeah, because to me, whether it's anxiety, PTSD, ADHD, eating disorders, whatever the case might be, that is the symptom, but that's not the catalyst that started it. So
that's what I read in your work, that PTSD is not the cause, it's a symptom.
Yeah.
And
so oftentimes we're so busy focused on that instead of, okay, so that is, and PTSD as an example, with, like there's so many different diagnoses we can talk about, but PTSD is one of those ones where people can go, oh my God, I'm going to be stuck with this forever. I'm going to be stuck with it for the rest of my life. But PTSD is a normal stress response that your body has gone through for whatever it is that you've experienced. Like your body, your nervous system, it's not wrong. It's doing its job, and it's telling you just how dramatic and stressful it was. We don't need to play that down. We get to listen to that and use that wisdom to come out of the other side. And with PTSD, sometimes that diagnosis, once again, can be empowering or disempowering, depending on how the individual takes it. I've had people tell me that, their doctor or specialist or whatever told them they would never get over it. And I'm sorry, but PTSD is not a death sentence. It is something that you can totally overcome. And I don't just say that from people that I've worked with over the years, but I too went through PTSD almost a decade ago, and I've been PTSD free for like 9 years now.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's one of those things that, back to what your mind perceives, your body believes. So if you believe you're never going to get over it, then you're going to keep being re-triggered. But if you believe that everything is helping you heal and you're doing, like, you can't just magically hope that it happens.
No.
You know the drill. We've got to do the work to make it happen. But with time and effort and understanding, you can 100% overcome it.
Yeah. It's like Deepak Chopra says, you can believe the diagnosis, but you don't have to believe the prognosis. Like people that get told they've got cancer. Oh, okay, now you have to go and do chemo and all of this. No, you don't have to do that. You can, choose to do something else. Or you could. You could do a combination or whatever you think is right for you. So, yeah.
Exactly. So there's not just, one road, but there's lots of roads that you can take. But, you don't have to, like you said, that prognosis thing. It's like, okay, that's just a statistic, but we don't know what your future holds.
Yeah. Yeah. And in his book, Quantum Healing, he talks about this, that he had this cancer patient, and he worked with her and gave her Ayurveda and all the rest of it, and cured the cancer. And then everybody said, how can that be possible? You didn't do anything. And then she started doubting herself, and it came back. It is the mind-body connection. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And you know what? The mind can definitely impact that. And I think that in the modern world that we live in, there's so many different caveats if we start going down like the cancer route.
Yes,
But
of course.
yeah, but it is fascinating how powerful, as you and I know, and we're fascinated with how strong and impactful the mind is. And so I always say you want to go into Grand Central Station, because that's going to help you do anything and everything.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about how you can use your own biochemistry to heal.
So I like to, as you've already gathered, look at things from a very holistic standpoint and intertwine loads of different modalities of healing, of wellness, of, therapies all together. And to understand what's going on in your body, to understand what's going on in your nervous system, to me, that's very powerful, to be able to understand why you've felt the way you've felt, why you've maybe reacted the way that you've reacted. I find every single time I educate, groups or events, especially when we start going into unpacking the nervous system, like it's almost like bug eyes all around the room going, oh my God, this explains everything. and I think the more that you understand what's happening in your body and in your nervous system, and why things have happened the way that they have, and how that correlates to the emotions that you experience, then you can sit there and go, oh, there's nothing wrong with me. That's a normal response. And it's almost a sigh of relief. And that knowledge doesn't just help you, feel better about that your body's doing what it's naturally designed to do, but it actually guides you for in future to be able to catch yourself and go, oh, I'm noticing this is a nervous system response. I'm noticing these emotional symptoms. You start to pick up the breadcrumbs that your body's giving you, and you're like, oh, I know what's happening, and I know what to do to help myself with this. So to me, it's very empowering to understand it, because we're not just a mind, we're not just a body, we're not just a soul, we're all of those things. So if we can bring all of those worlds together in ways that you can use on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis, then it gives you people the power back, which means they can start trusting themselves again.
Yes, absolutely.
And that's huge when we look at, trauma and mental health recovery, because most people have lost faith in themselves. They've lost trust in themselves, in their judgment, in their decision making, in their ability, personally or professionally. Like it eats away at them. So it's a really powerful way to start building that self-trust again.
Yes. So that's something I was going to ask you about, self-doubt. And I think that when we are in touch with our emotions and we recognize them, then we start to realize that we can have that trust. Yeah, because I find a lot of people, I'll ask them, what emotion are you feeling? And they actually don't know. They can't put it into a word what that emotion is, which is really interesting to me because this is kind of what we deal with a lot. Um, yeah, so how do you think that you can do that?
So if they don't know their emotions, I'm always curious to whether they're operating in that freeze numb zone. And remember, when you're numb, you
Mm,
don't really know. You're disassociated. You
yes.
you just don't know anymore. Um, and to me, that would be a curiosity to pull that thread. Like, is it that they are sitting in freeze, so they are numb? And as you know, numbness is the highest form of pain. So what are they blocking and protecting themselves from? That would be a thread that I'd be interested in pulling.
Mm,
And outside of that, it could be that maybe they've never been safe to express how they
really
feel
true.
before. Like, there's so many different caveats. So when someone doesn't know how they feel, I think that's a good thing, right? Like,
You're sort of starting at ground zero. You can build it up.
but I always think when someone doesn't know something, amazing, because now we're going to discover something about you that we didn't know before.
Yeah,
Like,
true.
that's a cool place to be, back to infinite possibility. Like,
Mm,
to me, I think that's an empowering place. And I think that's also a bit of a reframe mentally for most people, because if we look at our schooling, when we didn't know something, that was bad.
yeah.
You weren't doing
So
well,
true.
right?
Yes.
So there's
Yes.
this
You have to
fear.
flip it. Have to flip it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's
This is
this
a good
fear.
thing.
Yeah. Such a fear around, I don't know. Oh my God, I don't know. Oh my God. And that creates more of that stress
Anxiety, yeah.
instead of, I don't know. Man, how cool is that? I'm about to discover something new.
Yes. 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 I like that. Rethink.
Yeah. It's a good little reframe, but I think some of that I don't know stuff comes from that, childhood programming and what we've experienced in our schooling life, and changing the connotations of I don't know something being awesome. Now we can forge something new.
Mm. Yeah, I just had this thought, like when you're in school, when a teacher said, "Oh, you don't know," you know, we could have said, "Well, that's your job to teach us."
Right? That's exactly it. But there was almost like shame and
Oh, there was a lot of shame
embarrassment
around
because
it.
we didn't know something.
Yeah.
And now as an adult, it's almost like, oh, I don't know how to do something, or I don't know something. Great, I'm going to learn something new.
Yeah. Yeah. Build the muscle.
Yeah.
And so what's your take on communication in relationships?
Mm. So communicate, like, so let's get more specific with that. Like, are we looking families, intimate relationships, friendships? What type of relationships?
Start with intimate relationship.
Mm. So I think when it comes to communication, everyone knows the saying communication is key. And we all know it's true, except communication is only as good as how the other person can actually hear us, how the other
True.
person can actually interpret what we're saying.
And so
And
maybe that part of that is that it's actually a two-way street. Yeah.
correct,
Yeah.
absolutely. So I think that communication, especially in an intimate relationship, you get to look at the core values there. So, honesty, integrity, authenticity, openness. Like, there's so many things that I think are important to bring to the table. But I think that oftentimes there's a assuming that your partner knows something
Yes.
without being communicated with. And nobody is a mind reader. Like, it's not possible. And so I think that when it comes to communication in a relationship, it has to be ongoing, and it has to be a checking in with, does that make sense? Do I need to explain that better? And not in a, I think people need to drop the ready for a fight and
Yes.
just go. Oftentimes couples, they do this whole I'm going to win thing. And if you create that one wins and one loses, the relationship is always going to lose.
Yes.
So, you know, that's a tennis match back and forth, and only one person can win. So in my mind, I like to flip it and go, yeah, okay, it can be a tennis match, but it's a doubles tennis match, and you're on the same side of the court, and it's you two against whatever the problem is, because you and your partner are meant to be a team.
Yeah.
And that changes perspective, because now you're dealing with a teammate and you have the same goal, which is to deal with and fix whatever the problem might be, right?
Nice. Yep.
And I think that something that my partner says often is that it doesn't matter how many times we've talked about something, you can bring it up again. If there's still something there that needs to be spoken about, it's always on the table.
Yeah.
And he always says that it doesn't matter what you feel. If it's how you feel, it's valid. So what he means by that, he's very wise. What he means by that is, it doesn't matter if he doesn't resonate with how I'm feeling or vice versa. That doesn't matter. If it's true for that person, we get to bring it to the table and be heard, be seen, be loved, be supported, be whatever it is by the other person, because that's each other's reality.
Yes.
And so what that does is it opens up a space to be like, you can be all of the authentic pieces of yourself, not just a version of yourself that you feel is going to be acceptable by your partner.
That's great. Yeah.
Yeah, because in our intimate relationships, it's the closest person that anyone can ever be. It's the biggest relationship outside of the one that we have with ourselves. And, you know, some people will argue that their children are just as close, if not closer, than an intimate partner. However, that's a different dynamic again.
Oh, yeah.
Because your partner is the only person that gets to see you in your most raw, your most real, your most vulnerable, your most insecurities, your most happy, you know, enlightened self. Like, all of the intricate pieces, you make life decisions together. There are so many pieces that nobody else, even family and friends, do not see. And they say for a reason that your partner will lead you to more personal, professional, spiritual growth, because it's very true.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. It's interesting what you said about that you assume that they know. Like, quite often that happens with us. Like, we think that we've told the other person and we're just sort of going along, and we've forgotten that little bit of information. Yeah.
exactly. And
Because
you know,
you kind of are in tune with each other so much. It's like a little bit like the cloud, isn't it? You're so
yes,
involved in it. You can't really see the forest for the trees.
yes. And that little cloud, I like that. And I think sometimes we get a little bit used to that, because our partners can read us. They can read
Yes.
our energy. They know stuff that's going on, you know, unspoken, and vice versa.
Yes.
But sometimes that gift can be a little bit taken for granted, like, oh, they know already.
Yes.
If you haven't communicated it, and women, especially for men, because men are so logical and women are so completely different, you know, Men need that black and white, that, unless you've expressed it to me, he doesn't know.
Yeah. 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 We use our intuition a bit.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And they do as well. I just think they use it differently to the way that women do. To me, men and women are very much like the yin and the yang, right? We are complementary, we're equal, but we're not the same. We bring something completely different to the table, which makes the whole, because that's why it's the yin and the yang, the masculine, the feminine, those different energies to the table.
Yeah. With a little bit of the other one in it.
That's
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. What about setting boundaries? What do you think of boundaries that work?
So when it comes to, I like to call it healthy boundaries instead of just boundaries, because when we talk about healthy boundaries, first of all, someone needs to know themselves very well to understand what they need and what they don't need.
Absolutely.
There's got to be a level of self-love. There's got to be a level of relationship with yourself. There's got to be a level of self-respect to know what you do and don't stand for.
Yeah.
And therefore, those expectations, if you will, of how others, whether it's your partner, your family, your friends, your work colleagues, will, connect with you or treat you or whatever the case might be. And I like to point out to people that there's no such thing as right and wrong with healthy boundaries. It's right and wrong for each individual. And because it's right and wrong for each individual, that means you get to express yourself from a centered space, because the person that you are having the conversation with around healthy boundaries, they might have no idea, because maybe they don't need that. Or,
Yes.
Oftentimes we go in with these, oh, you're disrespecting me, or whatever the case might be. Most people don't intentionally go out of their way to hurt, harm, or, disrespect someone. Most people are just running on autopilot, and they don't realize how their actions or inactions or words can impact someone else unless it's expressed clearly and from a centered space.
Yeah, so true. And I think that's something interesting that you said, that you disrespected my boundaries or something like that, that if you say it from an I statement, it doesn't have the same impact, that these are my boundaries that I require, rather than involving them in that specification. Yeah.
Yeah. And to me, I really love opening up a really beautiful conversation when it comes to healthy boundaries. And it can be how can we better love and support one another? Because for me, I feel loved and supported when we do XYZ, or when we don't do blah, blah. And then you're opening up a sharing space, because relationships are not one-sided, they are give and take. And if we look at love languages, and if we bring all of these different tools into play, the more that we can learn about the other person, the more we can better love and respect their boundaries and ask for the same in return. So it is that give and take again.
Yeah, so true. And so, what are your values in relationship, in your intimate relationship?
So I think I've expressed some of them already. So, that love and respect and care. And I think, some of the things that are so important to me, like you've probably already gathered, I'm so big on authenticity.
Yeah.
And to me, it's so important, not just for myself to be all of the intricate pieces of who I am as a person, but also for my partner to do the same, and to not just feel accepted for that, but to feel celebrated for that.
Beautiful. Yeah.
I
That's
think
great.
that's, yeah. And I know for myself with, previous life experiences I've had to shrink myself away and water myself down and be a very small version of who I really am. And I, without putting words in his mouth, I feel like my partner's had some similar experiences where he's felt like he has maybe been too much or whatever the case might be. And so it's allowing the bigness of whatever that is and loving and celebrating that. To me, that's really important. And I think to me, something that's really important is that understanding and that support. And what I mean by that is understanding our similarities, having those commonalities, those goals, those dreams, those things that we both want to work towards, that are joint, joint passions, joint goals, joint stuff that we want to do, but also that support on our individual goals and dreams.
Yes.
Because while we're together in a couple, it doesn't mean that we lose our individuality. That should be celebrated and supported. So, I've got goals and things that I want to maybe achieve, personally, professionally, and the same with my partner. And to me, that value of being that little cheerleader for each other, to me, that's really valuable. So there's so many different values.
That's a really good one. I love that one. Support. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, there's so many different values, I think, when it comes to relationships. But I think the biggest one is to have ongoing conversations with your partner about their values in the relationship, so where you're the same and where you're different, so that you can honor one another. So my partner and I are both really big on prioritizing one another, and we're on the same page for that. And we both experienced in our, before we came together, where we weren't a priority, where we didn't matter. And so that's been something that's really beautiful, is that it's just, we are already there because we both have those values. And so sometimes what could be seemingly small as a value to someone else can be really big to another person. And I think that when it comes to your relationship values, keep having those conversations, because we constantly learn, grow, and evolve. So the person I am now is different to who I was a year ago.
Absolutely.
Same again. And the same with our partners too. So the cool is we get to keep relearning and re-falling in love with this amazing human as they keep evolving too. And that includes the values and then the relationship values, because they'll evolve over time as well. So I think it gets to be an ongoing conversation, because the values of the relationship will change as the relationship evolves, and as the two people involved evolve too.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's a really good point, that sometimes if it's not working, then it's maybe that we're considering them as the person they were a long time ago. And we're still stuck in the past thinking that's who they are and labeling them as that or something. And then they're not actually that person anymore. Yeah. They've moved on. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that's, pretty important. Well, that's really good. And is there anything else you'd like to add? Maybe anything to do with trauma that you think is relevant to relationships, like if we go on that sort of idea that how do we adjust to life changes like that happen in our life, and support our partner with those traumas that they have experienced.
So it's interesting to go down that rabbit hole of relationships and trauma, because I work with a lot of people that have experienced domestic violence in some capacity, and I myself have experienced that as well. And when people go through horrendous things in relationships, oftentimes there's a fear that maybe they'll never have another relationship again, or maybe they don't want to because they're so goddamn afraid of what a relationship could bring, and they don't want to lose themselves again, or however else they're feeling. And so I think when you're going through whatever relationship traumas that have happened in the past and you're working on yourself, I think it's important to remember that the past is
the past.
There. Yeah.
And it can't hurt you now.
Yeah, exactly. But you can't throw other people under the bus that weren't the ones that hurt you. And you know,
make an association with the person that you're with. Yeah.
And I say to parents often, you don't punish one child for what another child did, because that's stupid, right? Like that, and people
doesn't make sense.
Laugh at that. They're like, oh, that does exactly. It doesn't make any sense. But we do this romantically. We pack up all
unconsciously we do, yeah.
And we bring it in. And I think that if you've got a connotation that you're going to need to heal before you can fully get in a relationship, you'll be, that's never going to happen, because back to the spiral staircase, we're always going to be evolving. And I even think for myself.
And you can heal together.
Exactly.
You know, somebody can be so supportive that can be like the catalyst for it.
Exactly.
Well, and like you were saying before, like, you know, if you feel safe, you'll suddenly be able to tell that story, or you'll be able to, feel comfortable to do that.
Absolutely. Like, my partner knows stories that have happened to me that I've shared with nobody else. And that's the beautiful thing is, you're going to bring all of your shit into the relationship, and you've got to take ownership of it and do your part around it. And they're also going to bring their shit into the relationship, and they need to take ownership of it. And then you need to work together to help each other with it. Because that is also how we evolve. That's also how we help one another heal. And in those intimate settings, it's such a powerful healer too. But if you project the past onto somebody new, you're going to hold yourself from having those beautiful experiences. Because I truly believe that love is the most powerful force on the planet.
Yes.
And that you can overcome anything if you choose to.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. That's a great note to end on. Thank you for today. It's been amazing.
You're so welcome.
Yeah. Had a great conversation. That's trauma is complex, but it also, when talking to you, it feels very light. It feels like it is something that you can discuss. And I think it's important that we do. Otherwise we can't move on.
It's so important, because there's nobody on the face of the planet that hasn't experienced something traumatic.
Exactly.
And you know, I appreciate your comments about bringing lightness to it, because I get that often, and I get people saying, oh my God, how can you bring so much quirky fun to trauma? And I'm like, that's just me, quirky and fun.
Nice.
But the thing is, it doesn't have to be the scary monster that's under the bed, because everybody has experienced levels of trauma in their life, and it doesn't define you. It doesn't make you any less of a person. It just means, just like everybody else, you get to be supported to overcome it, so that you can move forward and create a whole new chapter of life.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, I particularly like that word overcome too. Like often people say I survived it, but it's not empowering. But overcoming it is, yeah, more empowering, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. You know, that survival mode is when you're still in it. And so if
Yes.
you say that you're a survivor, or, you know,
Mm.
to me, that denotes that there's still struggle.
Yes.
So therefore it's still ongoing.
Mm.
Because as you know, language is so powerful. So if
Yes.
we're still using that struggle connotation, that doesn't move you from surviving into thriving. That
No.
doesn't move you from going through the difficulties to then the overcoming and then into the authentic self. Like it's supposed to be an ascension,
Mm.
not a yeah, that language I think is quite disempowering.
Yeah. Great. Thank you.
You're so welcome.
And so where can people contact you? You've got a website.
Yes. So if you wanted to connect in any way, I mean, all of the usual places. So my website is themichellepowell.com.au. Otherwise, you can find me on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn, all of those normal places. And yeah,
Great.
there's lots of ways to connect, or come to an online or live event or something along those lines, if all of this stuff sort of resonates.
Fantastic. Thanks, Michelle.
You're welcome, Anwyn.